exit strategy. It can't be indefinite. That's detrimental to immersion. When you talk about exit strategy, you talk about power vacuums, what comes after you leave, things like that. That stuff has to be well rehearsed, well known, before you justify going in. Other questions, please?
Yeah, well, just sort of one that kind of links to that is on energy policy. Because it seems if we have the right energy policy, it sort of takes care of a lot of other problems.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the region that we're just talking about, if we had the right kind of energy policy, we could let the states in the region take care of a lot of these issues. It wouldn't be our concern, and the military commitment to those regions would not have to be what it currently is. And I was just wondering what your views are on that. Governor Huntsman was pretty aggressive when he was in office for alternative fuels. I drive a CNG powered, Honda Civic dedicated vehicle. We've got great infrastructure here because some governors had a vision to do it. But on a national basis, we have had absolutely no vision for an independent energy policy, making us independent of foreign sources of energy. So what are your views on that?
No, that's an excellent question. When we talk about energy independence, and we're talking mostly fossil fuels and oil, really specifically, right? I am a proponent of having our federal lands here controlled by the states so that some of the resources are used. I reject the notion that says if we turn the states, they're going to trash the environment and kill, all the birds and things like that, right? I think states know better and they're more responsible. But I do believe allowing the states, for example, on Utah, federal lands, to be able to manage their own lands, I think that will help in terms of natural resources and energy production stuff. And it's not going to solve it, right? But if we actually, the states, have a greater role in that, I think you'll see innovation. I think you'll see things in some states, like you said, might want to do clean vehicles and clean fuels and things like that. I'm not opposed to it. One thing I am hesitant to do, though, is to subsidize and distort the market for those. I know the argument behind, well, maybe a little push by the government will help. We've been trying to push green technology and areas, and we got problems there. I mean, we look and see what's happened. So I'm reluctant to go down that route. I think what happens though is, the key to all this, and the key to our economic growth and energy, is, and this is something that you learn in academics, it's innovation, right? And so to me, it's how do we get the innovative thinkers and innovative minds to help solve our energy independence, as opposed to this is the government, this is the policy we know best, and this is how we're going to break it. And I think the way you have that more innovation and more people look at the problem is getting pushed more to the states and letting them take a greater role than they currently are.
Doesn't there need to be a national vision though for energy though? I mean, it seems like there isn't one.
As long as we're dependent on, say, foreign oil, yeah, it becomes a national issue because you're dealing with things. Right. Ideally, though, what you want to do is you want to move it so that we aren't dependent. Right. And then the states can actually have a greater role. So I'm looking at how we get kind of from point A to point B. And you're right. I want to see a kind of a weaning of the federal government's role as we have more self-sufficiency in our energy. Not just oil, but we can do solar, we can do wind, we can do a lot of things. So I'm not saying get rid of the national thing, but have it going in the right direction. There could be a lot more coordination with the states as kind of an initial first step, and as we have a plan and a path to move that down, as we become less dependent on foreign sources, I think is the path we can take. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's all.
Thanks. Okay. Please.
So you would support drilling for oil now, start now?
I would support turning lands over to the states and letting them set policies. Again, I think, the concern that if you give it to the states and they're either trash the environment or do bad things with it, I think those are solvable problems. You can certainly work with states and make sure. Again, no one wants to live in a state that's been decimated by stuff. So, but I'm not opposed to opening it up and letting the states have a greater control of policies on their own lands. If that's natural resources and development of that, yeah.
That's a very key point. I think you should bring that up in your campaign.
In what respect? What do you mean?
In the respect of saying that you are for states controlling their natural resources, and if they want to drill now, then so be it. I think that that would set you apart in a significant way. I would make that a key point, because being being independent for our energy is so critical right now. That's a very key. I mean, I would look at that almost as tying that in with having a commitment for a balanced budget. Those two together. And the third thing would be, I would say, getting our military back here. I mean, if there were an invasion of the United States, what could we do? How long would it take us? We've got all our troops all over the world. So, anyway, I just...
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. And, and going back to kind of our statements again, I like the states setting the policy. Again, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not for just, again, trashing the whole. I mean, there's responsible ways to go about these things, and I think, as the state, as the federal government, would transfer these lands back to the states, there should be mechanism in place to make sure that it's not. But
that could be the template
exactly
for bringing other. I mean, that's the hot issue,
yep.
And that could be the template for bringing others' powers to the states.
And it's an issue because I've been talking to some state legislatures, and they're so frustrated because the federal government owns so much of Utah. So, I know a couple of them who are they're actually working on some bills saying, well, you know what? Let's make it easy for the federal government. If the federal government has the will to actually give the land back to the states, let's make some laws clear what we do with that land. Maybe that'll help give comfort. So the federal government will do it, and I think that's a smart approach. I mean, they can pass laws now that saying, if we get this land back, this is what we'll do. And I think that helps. So this
and you get support from the people.
You get support from So again, having that transparent and knowing what's going to happen, the states can do a lot. I think when it comes to these state federal issues, especially federal lands. I get frustrated with the state because I think they're kind of always pounding the wrong methods. They want to go sue. And these things have been litigated before. I mean, the federal government can own the land in Utah. I mean, the courts have decided that. You might disagree with it. You might think it's unconstitutional, but the arbiter of the courts was going to say something different. And they try all these legal things that are expensive and stuff. But what I'm saying is, is there a way to work together so they create a known kind of plan on what they do with getting back? It might help a little bit. I'm not saying it's going to solve it, but it's a step in the right direction.
And you have the support of the people because they don't want to see the gas prices keep going up and the vulnerability of and also paying all their money to their enemies.
Right.
We're funding you to fight us.
Yeah.
So that's a great point.
Anyways, on federal lands too, don't get me wrong. I'm not out to get rid of all our national parks and here and stuff. And there's a lot of land here, and some needs to be protected, and we have more national parks than any other state kind of. But so I'm not out to get rid of all those. But there's a lot of land here that's owned by the government that could be given back to the states. So. Other thoughts? Other questions?
Where do you stand on foreign aid? We're giving billions of dollars to countries all around the world. Would you continue that policy, or would you cut that off in order to help our fiscal problems here?
See, current stuff I have with foreign aid is when we give foreign aid to countries who hate us or are subversive to our interests, to be honest. Now, so yeah, can we cut back on foreign aid? Yeah, again, my principles that I go back is, what is our legitimate interest? Okay, what is our interest in actually doing this program? If it's a remnant from some other program, or if it's just to please some special interest, to me that's not compelling. There has to be a concrete national either security or other national interest for us doing it. Foreign aid, so yeah, I'm not opposed to cutting back foreign aid. Would I cut all foreign aid? Probably not. I think if you look at the budget and the overall thing, where this breaks down, the foreign aid is a fraction. We got rid of all of it. It's not just our budget issues. But do we need to look at it? Absolutely. Do we need to address it? Absolutely. I mean, we don't ignore anything when we're talking about balancing the budget and reducing our deficit spending. But again, I'm not. One thing you'll learn about me is I'm not an absolutist. I'm not going to say never do that or never. I'll tell you where I stand and what I lean. Again, I pull back on a lot of foreign aid, but I'm not going to say get rid of all of it. I think you need someone who can actually identify when it's helpful, propels our interests and helps our interests in the world.
So Jay, how would you balance that with something like Pakistan, where they need the foreign aid to keep a stable government so that it doesn't fall into a Taliban-like state, but then on the other hand, they're harboring someone like bin Laden? Sorry, I mean, that's a tough one, and I don't know what the right answer is myself, but.
But yeah, I think you kind of got it squarely in front of you, because you're right. You got to be able to make those judgment calls and say, I think we could be a little bit more aggressive. I also think too, when we're talking about areas like Pakistan or something, we're not in it alone. We talked about, for example, Iran. We have allies who can help us and support, and that's where I think diplomacy is key. I believe the more we can do with diplomacy, the better it is, because it keeps us that much further away from military action. So with Pakistan, I think we could be a little more judicious in our foreign aid. I don't like that we're giving so much to them and they're not that responsive. The key is the mechanisms. What do we expect from them? What do we link that foreign aid to? What results do we want? And to do that, we do have to be sensitive to their political things, what's going on. I think we can come to that with other people in the region. So I would probably cut back. More hard there. I think there's room there. But you're right. These are tough, thorny issues that, and I'll admit too, my level of Pakistan, I don't have security clearance. I don't know all that.
Right.
So I say that with the caveat that there might be some big hole I'm missing, but people back there in DC don't miss. They shouldn't miss those things. They should be asking the right questions. They should be doing the right analysis. And again, that's why I keep coming back to this. I talk a lot, but I want to know my approach and how I think. Because you're going to need someone back there who will make good decisions on issues that we probably don't even know about yet. And so with something like that, what I'm trying to say is I think I get all the different angles and what we need to consider as we make that analysis.
Well, and I think that's refreshing too, because so many candidates will just tell you what they think you want to hear, where they're engaging, and you get these people to go out and say these things that are very extreme. Oh, well, I would do this, I would do this. And you're right, there are so many candidates that don't have access to the intelligence, and they can't really make those statements because, it's funny, I heard George W. Bush in an interview say, I think the next president, when he sees the intelligence that I've seen, will make much the same decisions that I've made, regardless of what they say on the campaign trail. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So for a candidate to go out and say, oh, well, they're just missing the boat, I would do this, this, and this, it's refreshing to hear you answer the question with the caveat that, hey, I don't know all that I would know if I were in, but I think you're completely right. It's important to have people there that know what the right questions are to ask.
And the intelligence is really too, because I think there's also responsibility when you get the intelligence information, because you don't disclose the intelligence information, but you have to have a relationship with your constituents that they trust you and they know that you're not going to use it for your own gain. And the other thing is you have to be willing to question the intelligence, right? And actually ask the tough questions and be willing to hold off on doing it until you are satisfied. One thing I worry about is the intelligence community will say, this is it, this is it. And we're saying, oh yeah, okay, right. But I think you do your due diligence on the intelligence itself as well. And then you have to communicate your constituents, not the intelligence per se, but instill in the faith that this is the right thing,